It's October 15th, 1994, and the northbound 2E27 train carrying 127 passengers has just departed Uckfield, heading to Oxted. On the south end of the route is the 2E24 train travelling towards Uckfield. Both trains are on the same single track, meaning one would have to give way to another, but the drivers are oblivious that miles ahead of them is a train travelling in its opposite direction. A few minutes pass and a red signal blasts on to alert the 2E27 driver to give way while the tracks restructure to enable the 2E24 to go first, but the driver ignores the signals. With each passing second, the trains get closer, and a fatal collision looms. The only thing that can save them now is if the driver on the 2E24 train picks up his call from the signalman and makes a stop, but the deafening engine noise is against him. The fate of over 100 passengers now hangs in the balance as the two trains speed towards an inevitable disaster. This is the story of the 1994 Cowden Train Collison. But before we do get into it, guys, please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more train crash investigations. On the foggy morning of October 15th, 1994, a little over 100 passengers set out to Ashurst Station with the intention of travelling to Oxted. Ashurst Station, situated on the Uckfield branch of the Southern Railway network, serves residents from the surrounding villages in England, including Groombridge and Witham. By 8:20, the crew was complete and all passengers had taken their seats. At 8:25 AM, train number 2E27, the designated train for this trip, left Ashurst Station on its northbound journey to Oxted with 127 passengers. It was a regional passenger service train composed of units 205018 and 205001 of the British Rail Class 205 and a 2 or 3 car diesel multiple unit. The 2E27 was fitted with a 450 kilowatt 4-cylinder diesel engine, which gave it a top speed of 121 km per hour. At this rate, they would have arrived at Oxted in 10 minutes, but the tracks had their speed limit. Controlling the 2E27 was Mr. Barton, while Mr. Brett Andrews served as a guard. For them to get to Oxted, they would have to pass through Cowden Station, which operated a single-line track. Single-track railways are common in rural areas where the volume of train traffic does not justify the expense of building and maintaining a double track. In these areas, trains travelling in opposite directions share the same track, with passing loops provided at intervals to allow trains to pass each other. Meanwhile, a down train numbered 2E24 departed Cowden Station at 8:04 AM on a single track and was heading to Uckfield. It consisted of 2 units of the British Rail Class 205029 and 205032. Cowden Station is situated on the Oxford Line, a partially double-tracked and partially electrified railway line connecting London with East Grinstead and Uckfield. The Oxted line begins at South Croydon, where the line splits into 2 parallel tracks, allowing trains to travel simultaneously in both directions. At Hurst Green, the 2 tracks diverge further, forming an inverted Y shape. This separation directs trains towards different southern terminals. One branch heads towards East Grinstead, while the other continues to Uckfield. However, the branch line from Oxted to Uckfield was changed a few years before the collision. In an effort to cut costs, the railway authorities converted this section into a single track line, with only one track available for trains travelling in both directions. Careful coordination and precise signalling became paramount to ensure safety. When this happened, the Wealdon Line campaign, through written petitions and newsletters, had notified the authorities that reducing the train's line to single line sections would cause a collision and had heavily campaigned for the redoubling of the route and its development. When 2E24 rolled onto the single line track, the points were set to guide it to Ashurst Station, and train 2E27 was not expected to enter the tracks at that time. But the driver ignored the red signal and got onto the track. His disobedience forced the points to switch to the other direction, thus triggering an alert in the signal box at Oxted Station. Back at Oxted, the signalman on duty saw the alert had no direct way of contacting the drivers as no radio system was installed. His only option was to call the driver of the 2E24 and ask him to make a stop. But Mr. Rees, who drove the 2E24, did not take this call. The noise of the engine must have overpowered the sound of the ringing phone. By this time, the trains were still about a mile apart, so the signalman dialed the emergency services, telling them that a train crash was about to occur in a few seconds. The 2 trains, which were now travelling at approximately 113 km per hour, soon closed the mile between them. No one could see the other one coming, as they were both moving at good speed, and the early morning fog was quite thick. quick. At exactly 8:27 AM, trains 2E27 and 2E24 collided head-on. The leading car of 2E24 rode over one of the units on 2E27, completely severing its body from the frame. The cab of the 2E24 was crushed and then toppled on its side, detaching cleanly from the chassis. Unfortunately, both drivers died on the spot, along with the guard of the 2E27 and 2 passengers. 13 other passengers were seriously injured and hospitalized. As is the way of the British Rail, investigators sprang into action, and it wasn't long before they spotted some clues. One was the bodies of Mr. Barton, the driver of 2E27, and his guard, Mr. Brett Andrews, found together in the driver's cab. Guards were not supposed to be in the driver's cab, so this was a breach of operating rules. Upon further questioning, it was revealed that Brett Andrews, the guard, had ambitions to become a train driver, and even though he failed the driver's test a couple of times, he frequently visited the driver's cab, probably to see firsthand how the controls were manipulated. This behavior, which had reportedly been repeatedly encouraged by other drivers, had resulted in him being reprimanded on 3 previous occasions, but it obviously did not stop him. Investigators speculated that not only was Mr. Brett in the driver's cab when he shouldn't have been, but he might have also been one operating the controls and ignored the stop signal when they entered the track. This would mean that Brett Andrews, who had no training or experience, was driving the train at the time of the accident. A pathologist examined their bodies, but it was hard to tell them from their injuries who'd been driving. Both men were found between the roof of their driving trailer and the front of the other train. Some speculators claim that simply being in the driver's cab was enough distraction to enable the disaster. If they were engaged in a conversation, especially one that would require him to point out the controls and their uses, he might likely have missed the danger warning on the tracks completely. Their attention was also tuned to electrical error, and the signal was examined and found to be working. Unfortunately, it was quite dirty. The dirt on the signal must have reduced the already low lit output, and this was only made worse by the heavy fog in the air. A twist to this was the presence of the automatic warning system in 2E27. Because of the number of fatal train accidents, special systems like this are put in place to prevent them altogether. The AWS system triggers a warning when a train breaches a red signal. When this happens, a sensor on the train register triggers a visual indicator right inside the cab, along with an audible warning. The 2E27 had this in place, so if the systems weren't faulty, it would mean that whoever drove it didn't acknowledge this warning. Some recovered parts of the 2E27 were tested and were working fine, so it is possible that the AWS was functional at the time of the accident. To further convince themselves, British Rail decided to install AWS magnets at the exits of maintenance depots so that any train heading into service would pass over them to check if a system was functional, and shockingly, it worked. The investigation board also spotted the lack of onboard radios in both trains. The signalman would have radioed both trains, ordering emergency stops with enough distance between them to avoid a collision. About a decade before the collision, in-cab radio systems had been declared mandatory for all trains, but that contract to implement this on these trains had been cancelled. The exact cause of the accident remains uncertain, but a probable contributing factor was the shift in priorities within the rail industry. The construction of the Channel Tunnel and the widespread privatization of the rail network led to the reallocation of resources and funding. This shift resulted in the downgrading of importance of implementing onboard radio communication systems on the Uckfield line. To add to the station's harrowing mistakes, no trap points were installed at the beginning of the single track section. These special points would have stopped a train from running through them to keep the other rail line safe. The final acknowledged cause of the collision was the old design of the trains involved. The separate chassis construction on both trains meant that each carriage could climb to the next, and this was what happened during the collision. Also, the heavy diesel engines were above the frames. There were also no anti-climb structures. These structures placed behind a train's frame are to prevent a train from climbing the frame of the other in the event of a collision. From then on, massive changes were made to help prevent more accidents. One of them was the installation of radios in trains. An analog radio system called Cab Secure Radio was installed across the railway, later replaced by the internationally standardized digital GSMR radio system in the 2010s. Trap points were also installed at the start of the single track section. New trains manufactured after this collision were designed to absorb impact energy in dedicated crumble zones. They were also designed to be shoved back on impact rather than waiting for the other to climb its frame. For the trains involved in this crash, only Unit 205029, which had led the 2E24, was scrapped. The 3 remaining Class 205 units survived and are still in muscle collections to this day. While 205001, which became a 2-car set, was undergoing restoration work to become operational again as of May 2024. Presently, a local interest group continues to lobby tirelessly for improvements and expansions to the Uckfield branch of the railway line, including the elimination of single-track sections. That, guys, brings us to the end of today's 1994 Cowden Train disaster investigation. Please, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more train crash investigations. Thank you, and I'll see you all next time. Take care. Peace.